In a quiet corner of South Florida, in the middle of the night, a small man moved a piece of stone that weighed as much as a truck. He did this alone, with no machinery, for 28 years. And in all that time, not one person ever saw exactly how he did it. His name was Leedskalnin. He stood just over 5 feet tall, weighed about 100 pounds, and was sick for most of his life. Alone, he quarried and carved more than 1,100 tons of rock into a monument. He called it Rock Gate. Today, people call it Coral Castle. He built it for a woman who left him when he was 26 years old, and who, as far as anyone knows, never once came to see what he made for her. The question that follows him is not how a man that small moved stone that heavy. It's why. Leedskalnin was born on January 12, 1887, in rural Latvia, the fifth son of a poor farming family working land they didn't own. He grew up sickly, bookish, and largely self-taught after the 4th grade. What formal schooling gave him little, his father's trade gave him everything. That trade was stonemasonry, learned at his father's side. It was a skill for shaping the earth's hardest material by hand, with patience and leverage instead of machines, a skill that decades later and an ocean away would become the only tool he'd ever need. At 26, he became engaged to a girl named Agnes, 9 years younger than him. He called her, in his own words, his sweet 16. By every account, he believed this was the beginning of his life. The day before the wedding, or by some accounts at the altar itself, Agnes changed her mind. She broke the engagement. Whatever her reasons, Leedskalnin never told anyone the full truth of that day, and he never fully let it go. Heartbroken and humiliated, he left. Not just the town, the country. He traveled to the German port of Hamburg, and on March 23, 1912, boarded a steamship bound for America, traveling in steerage, the cheapest class there was. He arrived in New York on April 6, 1912, 1 week before the Titanic went down in the same ocean he'd just crossed. He had no plan, no family waiting, and no clear idea of what came next. Only the certainty that he couldn't stay where he'd been left. For the next several years, he drifted, through lumber camps in the Pacific Northwest, through odd labor across the continent. Somewhere along the way, his lungs began to fail him. Some called it tuberculosis. No one, including Leedskalnin, ever confirmed exactly what it was. By the early 1920s, sick and nearly destitute, he made his way south, chasing warmth the way sick men of that era often did. He ended up on the road outside a small, half-built community at the southern tip of Florida, a town called Florida City. A local family found him there, sick and struggling, and took him in. Slowly, in the Florida sun, his health returned. What he did with that second chance is the reason we're telling this story at all. In February of 1923, healthy enough to work again, Leedskalnin bought an acre of land in Florida City for the price of a few dollars. It was flat, unremarkable scrubland. Nothing about it suggested it would hold the next 28 years of his life. He decided, in his own words, to build a monument to the girl who had left him. Not a grave, not a letter. A monument made of stone meant to outlast both of them. He was 26 when she left. He would spend the rest of his life answering her. He began alone, and he began at night. Using nothing but hand tools, wedges, and a tripod rig he built himself from scrap and old automobile parts, he started quarrying oolite limestone directly out of his own land, a soft, porous stone that hardens after it's exposed to air. He had no crew, no crane, no truck. What he had was block and tackle, ropes and pulleys, and decades of a stonemason's patience. Neighbors later said the same thing, again and again. He only ever worked in the dead of night. And that was by design. Whatever his method was, he made certain no one ever saw it. Curious neighbors and children who tried to catch him at work found the sight dark, or found him simply standing still, waiting for them to leave. A few teenagers later claimed they had glimpsed something impossible. Enormous stone blocks gliding through the air, they said, like balloons filled with hydrogen. Whether that was moonlight, imagination, or something else, no one has ever been able to say for certain. Rumors began early and never stopped. He must have secret machinery. He must have discovered some forgotten science. In a town that small, a man who worked in total silence and total secrecy was never going to be left alone by the imagination of his neighbors. What rose from the ground, slab by slab, was not a house in any ordinary sense. He called his first structure Ed's Place, a home built entirely from solid quarried limestone, walls and furniture alike carved from single massive blocks of stone. This is not a castle in the way the word usually means it. There are no turrets, no towers with flags, nothing borrowed from a fairy tale. It is something stranger, an open-air field of individually sculpted megaliths, walls, furniture, thrones, fountains, each one cut from a single piece of stone, and almost everything he carved pointed the same direction, back to Agnes. Hearts cut into stone, a crescent moon, planets, a monument dressed again and again in the language of romance he never got to use. He named the growing compound Rock Gate, not Coral Castle. That name would come later from other people after he was gone. To Leedskalnin, it was always a gate, an entrance built for a homecoming that never happened. Its centerpiece was a gate unlike any other, a single slab of stone weighing 9 tons, cut into the shape of a door, balanced so precisely on its axis that by every account a child could push it open with one finger. 9 tons of rock, moving on a fingertips pressure, built by one man with no formal engineering training. Modern engineers who have studied it since still don't agree on exactly how he found its balance point without modern instruments. When people worked up the nerve to ask him directly how he moved these things, he gave the same answer every time. I understand the laws of weight and leverage, and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids. And then he'd say nothing more. He never elaborated, not to neighbors, not to visitors, not, as far as anyone has found, to a single living soul. Whatever he knew, he intended to take it with him. And that is precisely what he did. The rumors grew stranger with distance, reverse magnetism, anti-gravity. Some said he sang to the stones and they obeyed him. None of it was ever confirmed. All of it was allowed to grow, undisturbed, in the dark. He insisted on keeping around his work. Around this time, he began to write. Pamphlets, self-published, self-illustrated, on a subject he called magnetic current. In his telling, everything in the universe, including the human body, ran on magnets. It was part science, part obsession, part private religion. Whether his theories were genuine science, elaborate misunderstanding, or a kind of code for his real methods, no one has ever conclusively said. But he believed them completely, and he built his life's second monument, his writing, right alongside the first. In the compound itself, he built a matched pair of tall stone obelisks he called masculine and feminine, a sundial accurate to the minute, and a stone chair angled to track the North Star. A man with a 4th grade education had taught himself a working astronomer's precision. 10 years passed this way. One man, working nights, adding stone to stone, with still not a single confirmed witness to how any individual block was actually lifted, carried, or set in place. In 1935, a private man's worst nightmare arrived. Word came that a housing subdivision was planned near his land. Leedskalnin, who valued his privacy above nearly everything, made a decision that still sounds impossible. He would move the entire monument, stone by stone, 10 miles north. He didn't drive and he had no crew, so he made an arrangement with a local farmer named Bob Biggers, who owned a heavy trailer strong enough to haul multi-ton stone. Bob would provide the truck, Leedskalnin would provide everything else. But even this arrangement came with a condition. Each time the trailer arrived, Leedskalnin loaded and unloaded the stone entirely by himself, and sent Bob Biggers away while he worked. "Go on now," he'd say. "I don't want anyone to bother me while I work." For roughly 3 years, piece by piece, the entire monument crossed those 10 miles. Walls, furniture, the 9-ton gate, all of it. With no crew, no cranes, no modern equipment, and again, no witness to the loading or the lifting. Some of the individual pieces in that move weighed more than 20 tons, heavier than a loaded moving truck today. He was, by this point, in his late 40s, still frail, still working alone, still at night. Not one account exists, not one, of anyone actually watching him lift a single stone during that move. People saw the loaded trailer arrive. They saw the empty ground where a monument had stood. What happened in between remained, as always, entirely his. The new site sat along the main highway to Miami. 10 acres of land he'd bought, right where passing travelers could finally see what he'd spent over a decade building. For a private man, it was a strange choice. Perhaps by then, he needed the road. At the new site, he built something he hadn't had before. A two-story tower of solid stone, part living quarters, part workshop, and crucially, the one space he kept locked at all times, even from the visitors who would soon start arriving. He kept building, a fountain carved into the shape of a crescent moon. A device meant to help predict changes in the weather. Nothing about the project was ever finished exactly. It simply kept accumulating, decade after decade, as long as he was alive to add to it. He installed a telescope of his own design, angled permanently at Polaris, and a sundial precise enough to tell time to the minute. A man who never finished the 4th grade had built himself, alone, into a working astronomer. By the end of the 1930s, the whole property had a name that would outlive him. Some called it Rock Gate Park. Later, owners would rename it Coral Castle, a name Leedskalnin himself, as far as any record shows, never once used. The relocation itself became local legend on its own terms. How does a sick, penniless, 5-foot-tall man move a stone monument 10 miles down a public highway? Alone, without anyone catching him doing the heavy work. To this day, no one has a full answer, and still he wasn't finished. For another decade after the move was complete, he kept carving, kept adding, kept refining pieces that had already taken him years to place. The project had no natural endpoint because its purpose was never really architectural. As the work went on, his isolation deepened. He lived alone above the locked workshop, suspicious of visitors' true motives, protective of his methods to the point of paranoia, and yet increasingly dependent on those same visitors' dimes just to survive. In the late 1930s, needing income, he opened the grounds to the public, 10 cents a person. It was, by then, his only real source of money. The man who had spent nights making sure nobody watched him work now spent afternoons walking strangers through what he'd made. He had no telephone and no staff. To let visitors know he was open, he used a large conch shell as a horn or rang a bell from the tower. A private man's blunt, low-tech solution to running a public attraction. On tours, he was polite, even charming by some accounts. But the method behind the stones was never on the itinerary. Instead, he sold his self-published pamphlets on magnetism, offering theory in place of explanation. Local teenagers kept trying for years to catch him in the act. A few claimed they finally had, describing again stones that seemed to glide through the air on their own, weightless as balloons. Skeptics call it moonlight and imagination. No one who was there is left to ask. Word of the place spread well beyond Florida. Newspapers ran features. Decades later, television crews came looking for an explanation too, comparing the compound to Stonehenge, to the pyramids, to anything else humanity has built without a fully agreed-upon method. Through all of it, he never married. He lived, worked, and aged completely alone in the shadow of a monument built for a woman who, as far as any surviving record shows, never once wrote back, never visited, and may never have even known the scale of what he'd made. His writing grew stranger too, mixing his magnetic theories with rigid, old-fashioned tracts on morality and courtship, as if he was still, decades later, working out exactly what had gone wrong at 26. To the people of Florida City and Homestead, he became a known eccentric rather than a stranger, a true friend, one longtime neighbor called him. Odd, private, impossible to fully know, but not unwelcome. A fixture, not a threat. He kept working nights well into his 60s, smaller, slower, more frail with each passing year, but never stopping. The lantern still went out to the quarry. The tripod still rose against the dark. The obsession had outlasted every excuse to end it. In 28 years of work, he never once let a single living person watch him move a single block of stone from start to finish. Not a neighbor, not a visitor, not apparently even Bob Biggers, the one man who helped him at all. He never told anyone his method in writing or in confidence before he died. Whatever combination of leverage, patience, tools, and decades of accumulated skill let him do what he did. It went into the ground with him, by design. He never really finished the monument either. There was always one more stone to cut, one more shape to carve, one more piece to add to a project that had stopped being about completion decades earlier, if it ever was about that at all. By late 1951, in his mid-60s, his health, never strong to begin with, finally began to fail in earnest. The nights of quarrying stone were catching up to a body that had never really recovered from the sickness that brought him to Florida in the first place. In December of 1951, a small sign appeared on the gate that had never before needed an explanation. It read simply, "Going to the hospital." It was the only time in 28 years that Edward Leedskalnin explained an absence to anyone at all. He was taken to a hospital nearby. 3 days later, on December 7, 1951, Edward Leedskalnin died. He was 64 years old. Officially, the cause involved kidney failure and malnutrition, the long cost of decades spent underfed and overworked, alone. He left no will. He left no confidant, no apprentice, no written confession of method or motive. What he left was 10 acres of hand-carved stone and a silence about how and why that no one has ever been able to fully break. With no will, the property passed to a nephew who was in poor health himself and soon sold it on. The new owners gave it the name that stuck, Coral Castle. In 1984, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places, official recognition for a monument whose builder had never explained it. In the decades since, engineers, physicists, and skeptics alike have tried to explain what one small, sick man accomplished alone at night. Investigations have found no evidence of hidden machinery, no secret crew, no confession ever surfacing from anyone who might have helped. His pamphlets on magnetic current have been picked apart for hidden clues ever since, treated by some as a coded engineering manual, by others as the sincere if unscientific theories of a self-taught man trying to explain a universe he'd never been formally taught to understand. The more mundane explanation, patient use of tripods, pulleys, leverage, and decades of a trained stonemason's skill, accounts for a great deal of it. But even that explanation doesn't fully close the gap. Alone at night, unwitnessed, sick and small, the arithmetic still doesn't quite add up. So the deeper question was never really about physics. It's about a man who had 28 years and endless opportunities to let a broken engagement fade into an ordinary regret, and who instead built an entire monument alone to make sure it never did. As far as any record shows, Agnes never traveled to Florida, never walked through the gate built in her honor, never saw the heart carved in stone, or the crescent moon, or the 9 tons of rock balanced to open at a single finger's touch. He may have built the whole thing for an audience that never once arrived. That is the harder mystery here, harder in its way than the stones. Not how does a man move 1,100 tons of rock alone, but why does a man spend every night of the rest of his life building something for someone who is never going to come and see it? Like the postman who built a palace from pebbles, like the man who spent 33 years tiling towers in a Los Angeles backyard. Leedskalnin belongs to a small, strange fellowship, people who turned one private wound into decades of impossible, solitary labor for reasons they rarely explained even to themselves. He never remarried, never, as far as anyone found, pursued another serious relationship in 39 years. Every night he spent quarrying stone was also, in some sense, a night spent not moving on, choosing the monument over the possibility of anything else. Skeptics are right that the physics in the end likely has a plain, patient, unglamorous explanation. But plain explanations don't account for why a man gives every night of 28 years, his health, his solitude, his entire remaining life, to a rejection that lasted one single day. Today, tourists walk through Rock Gate for a ticket price far higher than 10 cents, push the 9-ton door open with one finger, just as he intended, and leave mostly with a story about mystery and magnetism. Very few leave thinking about the 26-year-old who was left standing at an altar. So we're left once more with the question and not the answer. Not how one small, sick man moved 1,100 tons of stone alone in the dark. The tools, at least, explain most of that. The harder question is why a person builds a whole world, stone by stone, for someone who is never coming back to see it. Perhaps some people don't build monuments for the ones who left. They build them so the leaving means something.